Good afternoon, Fuel Milwaukee. This is Corey Jo Biddle, and I want to thank you all for participating in today's discussion, which we are calling How to Unlearn Racism. We're going to have a candid conversation about what racism is, how we learn it, and the process of unlearning it. So, for those of you who have been on the Fuel webinars before, you know I always tell you to get comfortable. Change your gallery view or speaker view, however you like it. I always do gallery because I like to see everybody's face at one time. And in the chat right now, go ahead into the chat and leave me a comment so I know you're here. Tell me why you were interested in this discussion and what you're looking forward to learning from the discussion. As always, the chat room is open for conversation with the participants. And if you have a question that you would like to ask, privately and have me elevated to the group, just go ahead and do that in the Q&A. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing really quickly because I just want to remind everybody the origins of this conversation, right? So if you were on the conversation with us last week, you know, we had a conversation about the white reaction to racism. So it was the first panel that we had that was an all white panel. And for some of you, know how I found some of those speakers, I just sort of said, you know, hey, my white friends, does anybody want to talk about this? And I had over 70 responses. So I knew that we would have to do a part 2 of this. So folks are kind of wondering now, well, why is this panel all women? And, you know, why isn't this a multicultural panel to talk about this conversation? This really is technically part 2 of the conversation we had last week, but I wanted to elevate the conversation and sort of start moving it forward based on what we all talked about. And once we knew who some of the speakers were, that's why we decided to make it a more, let's just move forward to the next step. I guess that's the sense that I wanted us to all have. So I want you to sort of understand that's why this panel is not multicultural. And the panel is all women because it's something I just felt like I should make it all women, and I have a special connection to these women. And you're going to thank me when it's all over. So I'll go back to sharing the screen here so I can talk to you a little bit about our panelists. So I'm going to give the panelists an opportunity to tell you a little bit about their work. I'll only introduce them quickly with my personal connection. And I see you guys leaving comments in the chat. Everybody, as you start to come in, let us know what you're looking forward to for this conversation. Welcome to this space. Leave your comments and we'll make sure that we're able to interact with you. First up, we have Martha Berry, who is the Chief Racial Justice Officer for Ywca of Southeast Wisconsin. Martha and I, hey Martha.
Hey, Corey Jo.
Hey, good to see you. Martha and I go way back to my days, and some of you that know me know I used to run the Black Holocaust Museum when I was in my 20s, and was trying to figure out how do you run a museum about race and racism. We were having a lot of difficult conversations, and Martha was one of the people that was around that knew how to have those difficult conversations. So we go way back to those times, and I know that she knows her stuff and she walks the walk and talks the talk. So Martha, thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So speaking of the Black Holocaust Museum, Jerry Ann Hazlett, who's an author and a media consultant to high profile cases and a bunch of other stuff, she'll have to tell you because her bio is as long as my leg. Hey, Jerry Ann.
Hi, Corey Jo. Hello, everybody else.
Jerry Ann and her sweet husband, Hibby, were griots. So that's Swahili for teacher, is what we would call the docents at the Black Holocaust Museum. They were griots at the Holocaust Museum when I was there, and we got very close during that time, and just loved them so much, had a chance to really get to know them in their lives. And so I'm so happy to have you be a part of the conversation, Jerry Ann.
Thank you.
Okay, so Dr. Worley. Hey, Dr. Worley.
Hi, good to be here.
Dr. Worley was one of my professors at Mount Mary, and there was a sociology class that I believe was the first time that I really learned the real details behind redlining and what happened in Milwaukee in terms of segregation. We had some very, very interesting and challenging conversations, and a group of women that was multicultural. And it was one of the first times that I really was confronted with what might be considered like cognitive dissonance, or what I felt like was sort of this obtuse denial of racism. I'm like, aren't we listening to the same professor? Aren't we reading the same textbooks? And Dr. Worley was very graceful with that group, and often I would speak up and I would see her smirking and, you know, kind of giving a little smile. So she encouraged me to explore sociology and what racism is, and be unabashed about talking about this. So Dr. Worley, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you've lived it well. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Megan McGee is the executive director of X Fabulous. So, hey, Megan.
Hello.
Yeah, so glad you could be here. So, if any of you know about X Fabulous, it's all about getting on stage and telling stories. And Megan and some folks from our team came to me not too long ago and said, hey, look, we want to create a space for storytelling, but it should be a Black space where Black professionals could come and talk about their experiences. And we're going to stop folks at the proverbial door and say, no, this is not your space if you're not a Black professional. And we did that, and it was successful. And we did another one, and it was successful. So I really wanted to have her be a part of this conversation as a fellow millennial, to kind of talk about what it's been like in our experience and to celebrate the work that she's doing. So thanks for being here, Megan.
Oh, thank you for having me and for that past support.
Yes, absolutely. So right now I kind of want to go to, I wanted you all to know why I chose these speakers, but a lot of their work is work that you've seen and maybe you haven't necessarily attached it to them. I want them to explain a little bit about what they do professionally as it relates to this conversation. So Megan, I'll start with you. You could talk about X Fabulous and anything that you guys have been doing around race, racism. Kind of tell us what your work has been.
Sure. So when X Fabulous started, it was all grassroots, and we knew storytelling was powerful, but I don't think we really understood why. And the reality was, it was 5 white people. I think all of us had college degrees, like very much kind of one subsegment of the population. And we wanted to create, you know, inclusive spaces and whatnot, but there's definitely been a learning curve along the way. We did a project called the X Fabulous Fellowship a couple years ago, where we brought together a cohort of Milwaukeeans, all different ages, races, backgrounds, everything. And we had folks crafting stories about privilege and identity and racism. And that definitely took us a big step further in terms of, you know, creating space where race could be talked about, where it was normal to talk about it. And that was wonderful. But even then, there's still been, you know, there's still lots of work to do. For example, we had an event this last year where someone said the N-word on stage, and we did not handle it well. You know, mistakes were made. So I think more recently, we're saying we don't want to just be a space that talks about race. We need to become explicitly anti-racist. And that's going to be a journey. It's not going to be a destination. So from how can we get a bunch of Milwaukeeans together to how do we make our space anti-racist, like 11-year journey. And, you know, in some ways we've made great progress. In some ways we've only scratched the surface, but here to do the work. So that's kind of where we are now.
Thank you, Megan. Jerry Ann, talk to us a little bit about your background.
I'm really here under false pretenses in 2 respects. One is I no longer have a professional life. I'm retired officially. At least that's what I put on all the forms that ask for my occupation. My most recent professional occupation for which I was paid was that of a court media relations consultant, and which took me all over the world, working with court systems and governments in other countries. And I think that is a little bit associated with this, because I had privilege because I was the speaker or the presenter or the faculty, but not because I was white. And that kind of had me viewing things through a little different lens than I would normally do in this country. When I retired officially from the Los Angeles Superior Court system, and we moved to Milwaukee, something happened that was more than just coincidental. That when I was on the court staff, I was in the executive management group, and we had a field trip to the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. That Holocaust had to do with the Holocaust during World War II and the attempted extermination of Jews. But in the basement, tucked way back in a corner, was a small exhibit on the civil rights era movement, whatever you want to call it, the 1950s. And boy, seeing that I had such an epiphany. I understood for the first time what people who were involved in that movement were trying to accomplish. I grew up in the 50s when the images on television of these protests and demonstrations and so forth were presented through a lens of and I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, but it was a Black invasion. It was violent and dangerous people who wanted to come and take away what we had. And I'm not sure how fully I bought into that. I really feel more like a spectator, but I finally understood, oh, this is what these people want. That's what they kept saying. What do these people want? Why do they want to go to places, be in places where they're not wanted? And so that plus an encounter with a Black woman on another member of the executive management group, I just decided that I was just going to try to do something to educate myself and to try to undo whatever had been done. And maybe try to help the cause in some way. Well, I retired, we moved to Milwaukee, and one of the first outings I took, I was driving up, was it 43 that goes in, and they had the sign to North Avenue, and there was this green sign on the expressway, America's Black Holocaust Museum, and I said, oh, yes, and I had no plan to go there, but I got off, and I followed the signs, and I found it. And boy, I found a wonderful community of people who embraced me, and then eventually my husband. And so that's the first false premise. Ever since then, I think I've been more in just trying to continue the education, my self-education, and to try to connect people to attend events that I thought would be meaningful to me, and to try to introduce other people who I thought might benefit from such a connection. The other false pretense is the unlearning racism. I'm still in the process. I ain't there yet. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping to get as much out of this today as others who have come with such expectations.
Absolutely.
Too long, sorry.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much. Dr. Worley, how about you?
So you had asked about the professional shape, and I just want to say that, you know, the personal is professional and the professional is personal, and I hear that coming out in people's comments, and it's sort of my life a weaving together of those two pieces that have gotten me maybe to where I am now, where I am a faculty member at UWM, teaching in a relatively unique program on sustainable peace building, which is really about looking at how do you not just make social change, this is my life's work, but how do you make social change that is, I wouldn't say dramatic or radical or rooted, and really shifts the situation. So a lot of my professional work over the years has been studying social change, understanding it, learning a lot of strategy, and in doing the work that I did, my family really had a strong commitment to raising my sister and I as people who were out there acknowledging racism, acknowledging our role in racist and white privilege and racism. So right now, besides directing a program, I'm part of a research team on racism as a public health crisis. I'm also studying what is in the last couple of weeks come to be breaking the silence in the burbs is the term that's being used by one group, but I'm also studying and participating in organizations that are looking for how to address the deep divides, the hypersegregation. As a sociologist, I always talk about it, and I'd forgotten, Corey, how early I started with you. What I talk about it is, you can't really say Milwaukee as a city is hypersegregated. It's a regional, it's a state thing, and you can't undo hypersegregation by just trying to deal with things in Milwaukee. It's the entire, region, really the entire country, but you have to make it a manageable piece. So a lot of my pseudo-professional work is recognizing that after I moved here, after a couple of years, I became a resident of Wauwatosa, and then slowly opening up and learning what that meant, and particularly what that meant to, friends and colleagues of mine who are Black and brown, and thinking, well, maybe I should just move and get out of this, city, and then coming to terms with the idea that I loved my neighbors, I loved my neighborhood, and so I had to do something about where I lived. And that has been my work, both professional and personal, for the last few years. I'm very interested in, when we talk about sustainable change, what we would call structural or policy change. So one example of that was helping to build a park in my neighborhood that broke down the barriers between the lines that people used to draw between Milwaukee and Wauwatosa. A second example would be being a big part, actually writing the ordinance to create the Equity and Inclusion Commission that Wauwatosa put in place last year. But some of the tools I got for that was being invited years back, about 10 years ago, to help reestablish the Equal Opportunity Commission. I saw Maria was on the call today, and I don't know if she remembers me from that. I was a much more young thing way back then, but working with some of our elders in the community, Rose Datesman, pulled me into that and helped me to learn more about why peace building is also about undoing systems of oppression, not just about taking conflict and trying to mediate it. So really, I'm about long-term substantial change. Work some with some of my kids. One of my kids in MPS, two are in Wauwatosa, trying to figure out how to help school districts change, how to help cities change, and what the policy and structural pieces are that make that happen.
Thank you, Dr. Worley. All right, Martha, you're up.
Oh my goodness, I'm tired just listening to Lynn talk. I'm sitting back doing nothing, woman. Oh my goodness.
We got to get on our job.
Apparently. How many places can you be in at the same time? So, all right. So let's see. If I'm honest, in terms of the work I'm doing professionally, started long before I was a professional working at the Ywca. And I think many of us talk about our early years, and I know you want to ask that kind of a question in terms of how did we get formed. And I grew up in a small white town that, we all look the same. I don't know that it was ever listed as a sundown town with James Lowen's work, but it sure looked like it. And but anyway, family vacations and learning all kinds of things, but I'll save that for later. I've had so many folks of color in my life try to educate me and share stories with me, and my jaw was just dropping in terms of trying to understand their lived experience, because it was so different than mine. Mm-hmm. That I had to start educating myself. And I worked in a corporate environment for 15 years, and it was sort of like we didn't want to talk about race. We sort of talked about race. We kind of danced around the edges of talking about race, and I realized very personally that I was dying on the vine in terms of not being able to show my full self and ask the hard questions. And so went back to graduate school. Here's my solution to all things. Maybe go to school, maybe learn some more. And so I did that and had the opportunity to really study and learn about white anti-racist activists and how were they formed? What was it that made, you know, in a society that says race doesn't matter, it's not important, here's these people that are out there protesting and arguing and trying to understand and fighting for a different kind of a world. I wanted to understand their process. So anyway, did that and then had the opportunity to join the Ywca as the racial justice program person and was hired by Paula Pennebaker, who has since resigned, stepped down. But she, you know, when I was interviewing, I was like, you don't want to put a white woman in this job. You know, like that doesn't even make sense. And so she and I had many conversations over 13 years of working together. But at one point she said, well, Martha, don't you understand that if folks of color could have ended racism, it would have been gone a long time ago, gone. No reason for it to exist. So clearly the problem might be white people. And I was like, well, yeah, I guess so. And she said, so if we can hire you and get to more white people in terms of having these conversations, we're on our way to doing some of this work. So anyway, I could say a whole lot more, but it's been quite the journey. And I'm like everyone on here. And thanks for all the people that are joining us. I feel like this journey is never over and you get to wake up every day and make mistakes and screw up and have to clean up things that you've said and done, and you don't get to pull the covers over your head and hide. It's not even an option. So get uncomfortable. Let's go.
Let's go. Get uncomfortable. So I'm going to start by, I'm going to go back to my screen here. And when I started promoting this on Facebook, there was somebody, Ywca called, asked for some working definitions of racism and unlearning. So I just kind of pulled what was there about racism, and I thought what was really interesting, and it comes up in a lot of conversations about who's racist, who can be racist, the difference between racial prejudice and racism. And I just thought this definition was really interesting in that it talked about racial prejudice, but against people who are marginalized. And we've had that conversation a lot. I'll go to the word unlearn, which is to discard something that was learned, presumably bad, from your habits or lifestyles or your memories. Martha, how important is it in your work with the Unlearning Racism program to level set the understanding for what these definitions are and what they mean, and how do people react to that, particularly white folks?
Mm-hmm. So thanks for putting up a definition. We do a slightly different one. We do a three-pronged one with prejudice as one leg of the stool, privilege, and then the third one being power. And, you know, some people would take privilege out. Lynn, the sociologist, will tell us that, you know, any oppressive system has prejudice and power. We add privilege because I think it helps people understand that there's something that comes with whiteness and being a part of the white group. So I think the hard part for people is that if you think through that definition with those three parts, it means that white people are racist. That is painful for many people coming to this conversation to say, but I'm a good person. I'm good. You can't call me, because racism and bad have been so equated that people really struggle with that. And I always encourage people, go read Robin DiAngelo. There's articles out there, read White Fragility. I think there's a way that she really puts the information in a context people can understand. But also, you know, we have to have our toes to the fire, because the reality is we don't want to have to look at all the ways in which the norms have been so normed around our worldview that we think everybody thinks the way that we do. So why do we say unlearning? We've all been socialized around race. It's in the air we breathe. It's in the water we drink. It's everywhere. It's so much in our culture that because it's so socially constructed, in order to rip it apart, because it is a system that's got deep roots and tentacles, we have to be willing as individuals to unlearn all of that socialization that says, but I'm a good person, you can't call me racist. Well, let's start with the premise that in a system that has this all coded, this culture, white people are the ones with power. And you just need to look at institutions to be able to see that. So you can look at Congress, you can look at higher education, you can look at schools, health systems, you name it, 60, 80, 90, 95% run by white people. And therefore, the systems that are in place are keeping this stuff going. So people say, well, I didn't own slaves. My family wasn't a part of this. You know, all the arguments that people have. Important things for people to come to grips with, but come to grips with being uncomfortable with the fact that your norm is being, you know, it's like the rug's getting pulled out from under you. There's an earthquake under your feet. Accept it. Accept that that's a reality. It doesn't make anybody bad, horrible, any of that stuff. Just accept that this is what it is. So we have a lot of unlearning to do. Now, I'd say folks of color have internalized some of the messages that white people have wanted you to internalize, that, you know, you're not as good as, we're smarter than, you know, we're better, we're all those things. That has to be unlearned too, because that internalized messaging that you got is just as bad as the internalized messaging that I've gotten. So as you can say, I could stay on my soapbox, but I'm gonna stop.
Dr. Worley, how important is that acknowledgement piece in the journey to unlearning racism? I'm just reminded of being a very frustrating day in class where it just seemed like these students there was a student, I remember we were talking about, I think we were talking about like Essence magazine and Ebony magazine and the reasons why those kinds of magazines even exist. And there was a woman in the class that was like, there's no such thing as white magazines. And I just remember being so angry, like Vogue, Cosmo, you know, I started naming all these things. And I said, and do you feel like you need a white magazine for you to see yourself? Or do you feel like you can walk and get a magazine? She said, I can walk and get a magazine, but I'm like, but I can't. And I just felt like she was so resistant to even accepting that. What is that? And how do people get past that?
Yeah, that's so important, because what you're really alluding to, and the language I'm going to use is something I've absorbed from this master's program that I'm working with now, is that really we walk through our lives with what we might call these mental models. And they aren't necessarily ones that we've completely chosen. That's part of what you're getting at, is that we have some ability to shift, a lot of ability to shift our mental models, but that takes interrogation. So that takes self-interrogation, and that's a big piece of that unlearning, is the idea that you are self-observing. What is my mental model at this moment? So anti-racism work, you wake up in the morning, and maybe sometimes even some of us dream about this kind of stuff too, unfortunately, but it's at every moment thinking, you know, what is the model here? What is the system? I know I used to drive you guys crazy in sociology about that, in terms of, well, yeah, unpack it. So what's behind that? How did that come to be? Why would we say that's normal? You know, how did we ever get to this point where this is what we say is what people should do? And being willing to do that. And I'll tell you the personal story of where I first learned to do that as an academic was really from, you know, it was from some of my faculty who were feminist professors, and then my African American studies sociology professor, who both were able to help me see that that I had, you know, despite growing up in a family that challenged a lot of this, I still had mental models that were being reinforced constantly. So it's unlearning isn't something that you do once. Unlearning is something that you're constantly doing, and you're finding in new ways. And part of what I think people really appreciate about you know, some of the work around white fragility and some of Robin DiAngelo's work is she has such a good way of putting, you know, what is that unlearning process? What do you need to wake up and notice? You know, and you're absolutely right. It's not just a personal. It's really important to me as I've gotten more into the systemic work. And I know when I took the class at the Ywca, part of what it did push me, I was already kind of thinking systemically, but more about what is actionable on the systemic level. That is sort of the, you know, that's the daily work. Finding somebody perhaps in your life that no matter whether they are white, black, or brown, that is willing to do that work with you too, to say, you know, hey, what is that system that's going on? What's your mental model right now? How is that operating, and why is that stopping you? And the reason for all of this, I think, to be aware of your mental model or your structure or your frame or however you want to think about it, is that helps to determine what you think a solution is, or what you think an answer is. And so my work in conflict resolution and restorative justice has been much more about thinking about how do we step back from providing a solution and think about how do we collaboratively name the problem first. So unlearning is about not necessarily saying, I know what's wrong here and I know how to fix it, but it's about being able to say, I can see that I'm surrounded by this set of rules and regulations or norms or habits or practices. And now that they're transparent to me, now I need to begin to think about, who's going to help me figure out how to change them? Who needs to be in that conversation? So there are multiple steps to that unlearning process.
Mm-hmm. Megan, you talked a little bit about the power of telling stories. I wonder if you can remember the first time that you noticed racism and recognized it, and how did that land with you as a person, and how has that experience played into the work that you're doing and your commitment to to uplifting people of all backgrounds now?
Yeah, I think the strange thing is that I don't think I did recognize real racism until probably sometime in my 20s. Like the reality is, I come from a family. My father's a college professor. Like there were just certain very nice liberal ways that we approach the world. And so when I was young, I think my concept of racism was like, well, I like LeVar Burton on Reading Rainbow, so I'm not racist. Like such a simple understanding. Whereas really, if you think about it, I was baptized into the Catholic Church, like as an infant, like from the very beginning, there was a white Jesus. But I don't think I recognized really any of that, I would probably say, until some point in college. And actually, after I graduated from college in Eau Claire, I ended up moving to Milwaukee and doing public allies here. And I think probably that year was when I really started to understand it, just seeing, in retrospect, how did people talk about different areas of the city? How did people label entire neighborhoods with safe or not safe? But even then, I feel like every couple of years I maybe upgrade my understanding. So even having to move away from maybe the white supremacist concept of like intelligence, things and they are proven by facts and they are cut and dry and perfect, to discovering that there's much more nuance and messiness. So I feel that even I'm sure as early as last week, I probably, again, deepened my understanding. But yeah, it's kind of amazing to think I got a great education and never learned about, the Tulsa massacre or any other elements like that. Just managed to go through life completely unaware with blinders on, but slowly peeling those layers back now. And I do think that the stories of other people were what really helped me understand. I know I've heard many, 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 but one I can remember real specifically, and this wasn't that long ago, probably like 10 years ago, Angela Nicole Walker, some of you might know her. She used to live in town. She ran for sheriff at one point. I can remember being with her at an event and her telling a story about, being followed in a store. And it's one of those things that intellectually I understand, but emotionally it's so different from my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Colbert always makes that joke, like, I know I'm, I don't see color, but I know I'm white because, and it's, yeah, because when I go into a store, people are happy to see me there and leave me alone when I tell them to. Yep.
It's so interesting. On the last discussion we had, the white reaction to racism, basically the part one. Before this, one of the panelists said that she had watched the conversation that I had with all Black folks talking about their experiences with racism, and most of the Black folks, their first awakening were as a little kid. And she said every time she has this conversation with white people, they tend to be a little bit older before they start to realize. And I think that's really interesting, why it's so important to have conversations like this. Jerry Ann, earlier in your introduction, I think you were pretty transparent in saying that you're continuing to unlearn racism, and this is an ongoing journey for you. one of my curiosities or things that I think about when I think about what white people are going through in this moment or thinking about in this moment, and you know, calling together a panel of people to talk about, you know, white folks talking about racism, is if there's any fear in admitting that there are latent beliefs or intentional things that were planted as a child, and maybe your grandparents, or that somewhere in your lineage there was overt racism. I just always wonder if white people are afraid to admit that, even if they know that it's true. And if so, how have you been able to get over it? Like, what made you walk into the Black Holocaust Museum?
Well, walking into Black Holocaust Museum was, as I say, was not coincidental. I didn't, it just wasn't coincidental that I saw that sign. It wasn't coincidental that I had kind of gone through a bit of a transformation before coming here. But I think Megan put her finger on it very well, and that is hearing other people's stories. And I really mean that, to listen and hear and understand. She made the remark about being just really unaware of the differences in the, you know, racism and so forth. And reminds me of something Reggie Jackson, someone we all know and love very well, said quite a long time ago, and I've heard other people say it, but he was the first, and that is, we white people have the luxury of not having to worry about it, not having to think about it. I can walk out of my house and feel safe and not be having to look over my shoulder and wonder, oh, is there a cop there? And if so, you know. And he said, every morning when I wake up, I remind myself that I am a Black man going into a white man's world, and I have to adjust myself, my thinking, my behavior to that world. And I thought, wow, just recently, what a stress that must be. And it's not just Reggie. I think it's everybody of color, but certainly everybody who's Black or identifies as Black, constantly on the lookout, constantly worried. Police, you run away, you don't run too. So I think that's one thing, having to admit. Well, I was in denial too for a long time. I grew up knowing that my mother was from the North, and therefore I wasn't as prejudiced. I think that was the word we used most often. I wasn't as prejudiced as other people around me were. And it wasn't until after I moved here, became acquainted with America's Black Holocaust Museum, and by the way, my mother was from Indiana, that I learned that my mother was born and grew up in a little town not far up the road from Marion, Indiana, the site of Dr. James Cameron's lynching, and the lynching, death by lynching of his two companions in Marion, Indiana. My mother's grandfather, and my mother, by the way, was maybe a year or two older than James Cameron, and her grandfather was an official, a county official. And I'm reading all about this, and particularly the book, I can't remember her name now, Our Town. And she was from Marion, Indiana, and she went back because and she wondered about her grandfather, because she had learned about all of the sheriff, the mayor, everybody was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And I wondered about my great-grandmother at that time. So for me, it's not like, oh, something I've had to keep hidden. It's something I was pretty much unaware of for a long time. And as I have discovered how ingrained all of this is in me, and I truly believe in all white people, that I know I'm not ashamed or embarrassed to admit it. I know that I'll get blowback if I say something like that around some people, but I've gotten so I don't worry about it. There are only a couple of people in my family that and I'm not talking about Hibby and my children. We're all of the same mindset. But my siblings, there's only one out of the 5 of us that I can talk to. And she has been a lifelong Richmonder. She has never lived anyplace else. And she might be seen as probably the most racist person in the world. But I can talk to her. When we talk, I know she's not going to belittle me or insist she's right or whatever. She'll tell me her thoughts. Like I just talked to her yesterday, and she was talking about all the craziness that's going on around here, and they're pulling these statues down like they've been there forever, and on and on and on. And so I could say, yeah, it looks pretty bad, but you know, they really haven't been there forever. And I kind of gave her the history of the monuments, particularly those along Monument Avenue in Richmond, Virginia. And she didn't know that. She just thought they had been there since the Civil War, and they were put up right away to honor those brave heroes who fought for their side. But I can talk to her. So not tough. Harder is having conversations, individual conversations with other people. I'm working on that, and I felt like I had hit a huge milestone. Earlier this year, we were in California, and we were having lunch with some old friends, very, very, very well-to-do friends, and I believe in my heart, very racist, although they don't know it. And I was, the woman was talking to me. Hib was talking to the man separately, and she said something to the effect of how, oh, she just doesn't put up with this racism and this discrimination and on and on. She's talking about people in her church, and she says, I don't see color. And I said, Diane, you're either in denial or you're lying. She, what? And I said, of course you see color. You see me, you know my color. You see anybody, you see their color, you know. It's how we react to it that makes a difference. So it's getting easier, but it's not easy yet.
To speak up can be easy. I was thinking about when they made the announcement that they were going to take the photo of the Black woman off the Aunt Jemima pancake box and syrup, and a lot of people have been rallying for that for many, many years, and just the evolution of that image where she goes from, you know, this woman with the rag on her head to, you know, now she has a relaxer and pearls and a, you know, a silk blouse. But the same history and pain behind the image. And I bring that up because I came across a Facebook post of a white woman that was saying how ridiculous it is that this image is being removed and it's not going to change anything. And then her friends kind of come and say, you know what, the woman that played Aunt Jemima, the money that she got from doing that, she opened up a church and donated to the Black cause. She was a role model. Yes, Aunt Jemima is a role model. And if they take her off the bottle now, you'll never get to know that story. And so I just pulled up some pictures of the original Aunt Jemima and posted them. And I'm like, this is who you think Black people want as their role model? This woman didn't even want to do this. She did it because that was the only job she could have other than being a real maid, you know? And the person got so embarrassed, she took the post down rather than have the dialogue with me. And I just kind of go back and forth about that. Dr. Worley, I want to know, what do you think? Do you think people, I mean, there's a certain level of ignorance there that maybe she didn't know, but I just feel like in this particular thread, they're like talking themselves into believing that something that Black people are clearly saying they don't want, that we really should want. I just don't understand it. What can people do in their own lives? I mean, you can't control what other people are doing, but I think to some extent we all do that a little bit. Back to the framing. What do we do to start to break that behavior in ourselves? There are lots of participants here, lots of white folks that are here because they're wanting to check themselves. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, I think that part of it, and I say this in all honesty because it's where I come from, is that when it's a moment when you know you have to say something, but you probably have some fear. And the fear is often about, what will I lose if I say something about this, and how will the other person think of me? What's really held my feet to the fire the last few years has been having the privilege to be a parent. Two of my three children are Black, and helping them to confront things. In fact, I think then I took a Ex-Fabula workshop. I worked on my story, but it never went all the way to ready to be performance. You can see I'm kind of tearing up just thinking about it, is having a small child, say to you, I'm a boy, I'm Black, and when I grow up, I'm going to get shot. And so then, a parent, how small can it get? A parent, a kid on the school bus says to the same child, you can't have a potato chip. Only the people who look like me, and it was very clear what was meant. White skin, light skin can have a potato chip today. You have to look like this potato chip if you're going to have one from me. And my decision of, and he's like, just don't do anything about that. And, and I'm like, I have to. And reaching out to the parent and getting pushback, but continuing to reach out and say, it's not that I want you to feel bad about what your child said. You weren't there, but this is a learning moment, and then a second racist incident happening to that same child later that year, and reaching out to that parent, and that parent immediately, when I share it, saying, wow, it's a different parent. This is a learning moment. So we have some concern that when we reach out to someone is that they might push back at us. And I think you experienced that in my class. You've talked about that. You put that up there and people push back, and that's hard. But the reality is that there are all these learning moments around us, and we ourselves can open up to those learning moments, but also where we can nab them, where we can see them. And it might feel like it's small, but in the long run, it might be really big, because sometime in 10 years, someone that you've touched might go to one of Megan's workshops and tell the story of the time that they woke up, and that it was waking up was because they talked to you. And that you were the person who kind of jostled them out of that moment and helped them on that path to begin, to look around themselves and see what is it they could be doing differently. So you never know when one of those moments could be presenting itself to you. So you have to, as best you can, grab those and kind of run with them.
Martha, I was going to ask you about what I think is a moment that the entire world is having right now. On Saturday, the Ride for Black Lives, the thousands of people on marching on their bikes went past my house. It was amazing.
It was.
So I looked out of the window and I see all these bikes. I'm like, oh my God, my kids have got to see this, because I just knew that it was bikes, so they would like it anyway. So we go outside to the corner. And once they realized that people were saying Black Lives Matter, and my daughter, who just turned 8, she's like, most of them are white. I was like, yeah. So of course the bikes, and they're just going across the intersection, Walnut Street and 20th, where we were standing, and it stopped the traffic. So a car drove up, and there's this one white man, and he's pissed. He's like, what is this? I gotta get to work. And a Black man got out of his car and said, Black Lives Matter. So then that diffused it a little bit, and the white man started laughing. And then so all the kids started doing it. It was just a moment, right? So I'm like, I've never experienced anything like these moments in my life. So one of the cars that was stopped was a white woman's car, and my daughter looked over, and she had written on her window, the woman's car said Black Lives Matter. And this is my 8-year-old. She said, Mom, look, her car says Black Lives Matter. And I said, wow, that's awesome. So the lady noticed my daughter noticing her, so she waved at her and smiled. And Asha is my daughter's name. She says, thank you. I lost it. I just started crying. I just lost it, because I think she's feeling like, wow, all these people think I matter. And this from this 8-year-old perspective. But I mean, I'm 40, I feel the exact same way. Martha, what are we seeing in the world today? And what do you think this moment is going to do in terms of progressing the unlearning of racism in our society?
It's a twofold question, because I think for the longest time, we'd have people come through our classes and somebody would say, okay, my project is going to be on making Black Lives Matter signs, and I'm going to put them in front of my house. And, you know, then that was a big deal for people because they often lived in all white neighborhoods, and you know, and their signs would get stolen and they'd get defaced. And, you know, so there was a really hard period where I think people were struggling. So there's a way in which white people have struggled to say that Black Lives Matter, you know, like say it out loud, say it proudly, put a sign out. You know, I see people now driving around with stuff on top of their cars and in their windows and posters in their windows at home. And but also through this, numerous Black friends of mine have said, you know, when I'm driving through a neighborhood, if something happens to my car, that's the house I'm going to look for. You know, it's that person has put up the sign. I would feel safe knocking on that door if something happened. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's just like, I don't think I need to let Jonathan Brostoff, who you had on last week, know that I care about this issue, because Jonathan already knows that we care about it. And he's like, no, you don't know that. I hear from the people that want the status quo to be remaining. So call me and let me know what your concerns are, et cetera. So it's that place that I think white people are waking up to. We have to stand in this moment. And I'm going to get emotional too. It's like we have to stand in that uncomfortability of, we don't want this message to go down just being said during protests. You know, we have to mean it. And I think the challenge, the conversations I've been having with lots of white people, with my family, with other white women, mostly white women, it's not that white men haven't been involved, is that we have to sustain this. We have to figure out how to sustain this. And we are the ones that have to figure out how to sustain this, because it's, I'd like to say I'm cautiously optimistic. I haven't seen this kind of swell. I mean, how many people have we seen murdered? How many stories have we heard, you know, from Tamir Rice, who's 12, playing with a gun in Cleveland? I mean, it's unconscionable that we have not had these tough conversations. But I think the challenge is, I wish George Floyd was still here. I mean, the stories that you hear about his life now, you know, like that's a man whose life did not need to be cut short. No Black and brown life needs to be cut short. And so I'd like to believe that we're at a moment in time where we can keep white people's feet to the fire of accountability, to listen open-heartedly, to care about what the Black and brown folks in their lives have been saying for a long time, and not give up on that particular conversation. And then stay, like Lynn was saying, how do I get involved? So, you know, maybe you're not ready to get involved. Maybe you're the person that needs to go back and read Robin DiAngelo 5 times because you need to really understand it. But there are ways to get involved in this moment that can be very personal. You can start wherever you need to start. But I think there's a way that folks of color have every reason to be cynical about whether or not we can sustain this. And because we get scared. When you were talking about fear earlier, we get afraid. And if we're not afraid, we're feeling guilty that we're going to say it wrong. So too many of us don't say anything. So we become bystanders and we witness all kinds of crap happening in our families and we don't interrupt. And I'm guilty of doing some of those same things myself. And, you know, it's like, okay, well, should I say this now or should I wait till later? You need to take that person offline and, you know, get them to understand. So I'd like to believe that we can do this, but it's going to require, like your daughter, seeing lots and lots of white people standing up in this moment and saying, Black Lives Matter, and get past the nonsense of, you know, it's not, you know, when people say all lives matter, well, it would be true if Black lives mattered as much as all lives. You know, if we could get to the place where the world was such that zip code didn't determine your health outcomes, your life outcomes, what your school outcomes, all those things. If we get to that point, we will have made progress. And so we are in a moment of a movement, and we have to keep pushing ourselves to stay honest about it. So that's why I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are. I've just been giving into it and enjoying it, because talking to somebody earlier today, and I'm looking at the time. And for the panelists, is it okay if we go over 5 minutes? Because I think that we might. As I finish my comment, I'm going to invite the participants too. If you have a specific question for one of the panelists that you would like to ask, please put that in
Hi,
the
Joe.
chat or the Q&A. Yeah.
I want to say something. It's connected to what Martha was saying, but also it's really important to me. And I think there's so much importance in semantics, how you say something, the words you choose, and so forth. My growing up, what do those people want? And that we want what you have. We just want what you have. And I don't think that's the right answer, because it puts fear and insecurity into the white people who are asking the question. And I just heard this the other day, and I thought, oh, this diffuses everything. It's what do you want? I want what you want. So it puts us in the same, you're not coming after my pearls. You just want to have some pearls like mine. So that is one thing. Another thing, and I've heard this from Reggie years ago, he hates the word tolerate or tolerance. I don't want people to tolerate me. I want them to accept me. And yet we even have a museum of tolerance. No, we should have a museum of acceptance. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. The one of my colleagues came over and was talking to me, and he's my guy. He's Jim Wall, a white guy here, older. He came to my baby shower when I was pregnant with my son. It was his first baby shower ever, and his day they didn't do the whole co-ed baby shower. So we have an ongoing joke, and I really like him. And he came over and he said, we would just start talking about everything that we're seeing in the world. And I was telling him, I said, listen, like lately I've been in grocery stores or driving or, just anywhere. And it's like, people aren't being like overly nice to me, but they're just not being a-holes. You know what I mean? And it's so weird because I feel the difference. Like, people will look at me in my eye. They have to, because we got masks now, but they'll look me in my eye. If I'm coming down the aisle in the grocery store, they won't just cut me off or like, almost smash into me. It's weird because you, as a Black person, you don't know how inhumanely you're being treated until people start to be normal around you. And it's just, people are actually stopping at the lights and letting me have my right of way, just the most simple things. And I'm feeling it. Like I feel less stressed, just a little bit less. The consideration, I mean, it's just, I could just go on and on and on, but it's just these little slight things that in this moment, I think people are much more cognizant and aware, and maybe it's fear, maybe it's just this overall wokeness that people are actually starting to see. You are actually a person. You're not just this other, or, I've always felt like I'm, not overt racism. I'm not walking in and people are calling me the N-word, but I have believed that you don't see me and see your daughter. You don't see your daughter when you look at me. I'm something different. And that affects how I'm mentored and how I'm spoken to and how I'm supported in the grocery store or through social services and medical, I just feel it in every bone thread, every thread of my life. And we're finally starting to see, in my experience, people are starting to really think twice about what they're doing, and that I'm not this, this other thing. There was and I'm going to look in the chat and see if there's any questions coming through. I want to know, what's the next step for people who have been jostled? This moment has jostled them a little bit, and they're starting to wake up and either recognize something in themselves that they want to pluck out, or just want to make sure that they don't harbor, bigoted and racist ideas. They just want to be right. And I'm guessing that these participants, these folks listening, are a lot of those kinds of people. What's the next step for them? Martha, I know you have a whole program.
Yeah, we do. And, I'd encourage people to go to the YWCA site, because we have a 5-part series that we're doing to just kind of introduce people to conversations on racism. But then we also have a 6-part. But some of it, I think, for some people is, learn, educate yourself, and at the same time being vulnerable and open and human in those interactions. And as you grow, I'd like to believe that as you get better, you can start to educate other people and help other people to understand. So you're the one that starts to interrupt. You're the one that takes the action to say, you know, that really wasn't okay what you just said, and we need to correct that, we need to clean that up. What I've learned is, for me in particular, I make a lot of mistakes, and I say things wrong, and I need to be corrected. And I had to get over, like Megan being raised Catholic, and mistakes felt like death. And now it's like, I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to have to clean it up. And it may take me a while and I may not do it well or pretty, but the inaction that we've been settled into as white people is really ugly. So we have to get better about speaking up. And but I think Lynn can certainly speak to, there's so many different groups that are activated in various communities to try to change that big policy and small policies. You know, like, what can you do in your organization? Well, do you know what some of the policies are in your organization that may be holding people back? You know, many people feel like it's a diversity numbers game, like we just got to hire people. But what are we doing once we hire folks? Are we promoting them? Are we figuring out how to really utilize their voice? Are we putting them on teams where they can learn and challenge themselves, et cetera? So I just think there's so many different ways, from individual to institutional to bigger structural things, that people can do.
Dr. Worley, what would you say the next step would be for folks?
Well, I think what you brought up is so important, because we have all this energy right now. And I agree with Martha. I think that, you know, it's the challenge in the next month, 2 months, there's going to be more pushback. There's going to be some organization we're seeing increasingly day by day. I'm hearing more and more reports of people who are getting not just quiet racism, but blatant racism pushed back at them. And so it's really the connecting to each other, finding someone to work with or a group to work with, a network that you can create that will help you stay accountable to it, and continuing to think about what is it that I can do, because I don't think that we're, you know, I don't want to be, you know, the downer of all this, but I think this is a start. We're at a start, and we have this huge opportunity, and we can decide to leverage it. Maybe it's like, you know, did we pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act and then we did nothing with it? What are we going to do now that we're actually going to do something with? That's our challenge, is activating it, because power changing hands, or power being made responsible to each other, is not easy work. So we really have to figure that out. And I see what you're putting up, and a big piece of my work is figuring out how to institutionalize those changes. I don't know if that's everybody's work. I think that you just have to figure out what is your work, and then find someone or some people to help you stay accountable to that work, and keep pushing through it, because it will be a core that will say, you know, when it gets hard, we're still going to be pressing these changes. You know, I'll tell you, one of the pieces for me is I keep thinking of my own personal timeline. Maybe you can think of someone in your life that you want to be accountable to. My own personal timeline, I want my my children, white, black, and brown, to grow up and live in a space where, I hate to say it, I mean, they're reaching a point now where the brown and black ones, they aren't cute anymore to people. They become a threat, and that's what we have to get past. We have to get to a space where no matter what the color of your skin is, that you're not immediately seen as a threat when someone sees you. And if we can get through that step, then we can start to think about moving from there to, what does respect mean? And how are we going to live out that respect, even if we might have differences around how we want to live our lives. So we have a big opportunity here, and I hope that folks in the Milwaukee community are going to take this forward and really, you know, make us shine. We often make the national news for all the bad things, and I would just love to see us make the national news for the communities that really changed in this time of opportunity.
Megan, I'm gonna share some photos here in a second from the workshop we all did. Fabulous and Fuel did together. I mean, I have like so many photos that I could share, but it just makes my heart smile that we just created this space just because you reached out and made a phone call, and I sent a couple emails, and we created a safe space for people to tell their stories. what do you think the next step is? What do you have to say to folks who are listening and want to take another leap on their journey to unlearning racism?
Yeah. You know, I think like it's a super white person thing to want to have a perfect plan. And what do they say? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So rather than worrying about doing everything perfectly, instead find an action step that works for you. And that could be anything from, like I have a toddler. I was never really talked to about race, but we talked to her about race at like watch Hair Love. It's a free like 7-minute beautiful film online. Talk about hair, talk about different kinds of hair, notice it. Don't pretend it's this thing that doesn't exist. Don't make it seem like it's bad by never mentioning it. It's like, oh, look, she has kinky hair. Is your hair kinky? Oh, your hair is different. Like, it's just a thing we do. So whether it's consuming media or showing up at a protest, even if you don't know what you're doing, like we have to be fine with not knowing the answers. We have to be fine with failing and even taking incremental steps. You know, a lot of people say, how are we going to attract and retain a diverse workforce? Well, you start by even in job descriptions saying that you're looking for folks with a demonstrated commitment to equity. You make that a criteria, and then if people in a job description in their cover letter don't say, oh, here's what I've done, well, then that means they're not qualified. That's one thing I've been doing at Xfabula, and over time it's resulted in, you know, we have 3 other staff people and they're all women of color. So it's about checking what our own assumptions are and being able to continually learn. So I don't know, there are a million ways to take action. Just find one and don't worry about doing it wrong, because you will. I will, and I apologize, and then I try to do better, and that's okay. It's not about me and my feelings.
There is a question in the chat about resources and places that people can go, and I'll come back around to everyone. If you have any that you want to share in the chat, please go ahead and post them. Jerry Ann, I want to come back to you and ask you what final words you have for folks who are on their journey. You actually serendipitously found a resource in the Holocaust Museum, and clearly it had a huge impact on you and Hibby. Any words that you have for the folks who are looking for a little bit of encouragement to take their next step? Do we lose?
Oh, I feel.
Yeah.
Are you talking to me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I keep doing this, but I just feel so inadequate because it's a journey I'm on, and I really want to be able to wrap my arm around somebody and, you know, come with me, you know, let's make this journey together or whatever. But I think you all have pointed out my reluctance, and that is I'm afraid. You know, I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to be yelled at. I don't want to get hate mail. I don't want somebody to come and vandalize my house, you know, whatever. My husband reminded me of something that happened to him years ago. We follow and just love Leonard Pitts, who is a columnist. Used to be for the Miami Herald. I think he may be just syndicated now. And somebody was asking him, what can I do? What can I do? You know, I invite somebody over to have dinner. You know, I do this, I do that. And I can't remember if it was Leonard Pitts himself who was being asked this question or another Black man, but he said, well, yes, you can do all of those things, but the most important thing you can do is grieve. That has stuck with me. And I tell you the truth, every time I went into America's Black Holocaust, every single time I cried. It just was spontaneous. So I don't know if that's my form of grieving. I don't expect everybody else to start grieving with me, but I do think maybe trying to help people see how they can try to understand what it's like to be a Black person. I will go back to my conversation with my sister yesterday about how foolish it was going around changing the names of everything willy-nilly. The schools, they're changing the schools that are named, you know, Robert E. Lee School or whatever. And I said, yeah, it does. It really does seem kind of silly. But, you know, I just think, what if I were a Black student attending a school that is named Andrew Jackson School or Robert E. Lee School or whatever? How would I feel going into that school every day with my Black skin, knowing that it's named after somebody who led an army or fought in a war to that with the intent of keeping me a slave? And I think it would affect me. And so, yeah, I think we have to get over being an exclusive country to being an inclusive country. And bless her heart, she kind of seemed to understand what I was saying. And so maybe that's how we need to start talking. We keep hearing people say, I'm not a racist, I'm not a racist. This is something else I learned the other day. If you have to say I'm not a racist, you probably are. But something you can say is, I am anti-racist. So I'm going to be trying that one on for a while.
Jerry-Ann, thank you so much. You're so adequate. You're so perfect. You have like the perfect spirit for this kind of conversation. So thank you so much.
I'm so thrilled you invited me.
Yeah, I'm glad that you could be here. Dr. Worley, Martha, Megan, are there any resources that you want to shout out really quickly that we didn't touch on?
I think we already put our website out. The other group I've been involved with, I think a few people have, is Red Racism, and they've been trying to do, and I don't know if they've been successful, trying to gather a lot of events that are happening to give people at least one site to go to find different events. Every time we do a class, we share and get people to share. I always encourage people to read Milwaukee's Neighborhood News Service, because I think they do fair and balanced reporting and really do a broad swath, tell people stories, listen to people. I feel like there's a lot of groups because of the present moment. So Surge Milwaukee has been a good one, standing up for racial justice, really has good resources and links on it, really thoughtful, challenging conversations. And there was another one. There's a lot of different, like Milwaukee Peaceful Protest, People's March. There's a few different groups that are out there trying to organize to keep. I've heard some people say, if we could march in the 60s for 200 days for to get housing changes, then we should be able to do 201 days of this kind of marching to get things to change. So I think there's a lot of good resources out there. You just have to start looking, and I'll start talking.
Yep. Dr. Worley, any last thoughts?
Well, I could push our Toasted Together Facebook page. One of these days we're going to have a website, but I did also post the Red Racism because I know they're trying to collect a lot of material. Really honor the work that Bridge the Divide is doing to the north side of the city. And in fact, I'm involved right now in some research collecting examples of all the different work that's going on in the region. So I think it's like, you got to think, are you thinking regionally? Is it your city? What is it you want to change? Do you want to have a conversation with your neighbor? Do you want to change the laws in your town and make sure that people are being treated fairly? Any of that's available, and there's groups working on it. And I think the important piece, as folks have mentioned, is to figure out what is your piece of journey right now. Get out there and do it. I really didn't think I could make 18 miles on a bicycle, but it was important. And I have a broken toe. I got out there and I did it because I was told in my mind that I have to overcome that fear, that I could get out there and do it. And I think that's what we need to do right now. Get over the fear, trust, respect, and figure out how we are going to make our little corner, whatever it is, better and more inclusive.
Thank you, Dr. Worley. Megan, last words.
Trust Black women. Make sure we don't center ourselves, because I think as a white person, it's really easy to accidentally make stuff about us. But the more I listen to Black women and follow them, and like if you know, you want a resource, look up what Dr. Monique Liston has been writing. Look at things like Love on Black Women and the work they're doing to, you know, to redistribute money and get it to help people with their basic needs. Yeah, so listen to Black women especially.
Thank you all so much for being a part of this conversation. I know we went over a little bit, so thank you for your time. Extra 15 minutes, we had a bonus.
So thank you, Corey Jo, because it takes courage on your part to keep inviting all these people to have this conversation, and your warmth and generosity just makes it so possible for people to keep talking about this. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
As long as people keep signing up, I'll keep doing it. It's so good to see you all. So this is the point in the conversation where I encourage people to go in the chat and leave little love notes for our speakers. So if you want to show them some love, I will definitely share it with you. Usually when I do this, I try to show a little video. So I'll give folks, if you got to hop off, you got to hop off. That includes the panelists and the participants. If you want to watch this little 3-minute video, then I'll play it for you as folks are going into the chat to leave their little love notes. So with that, I will close out the conversation. When we come back, the video will have been over and we'll have lots of great notes for me to share with the panelists. Again, thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to all the participants. You guys are really, really awesome. And I'm really inspired by the fact that so many people want to keep having this conversation. So wait, let me make sure I got the sound on. Let me reshare it. I'm after all these months, I'm still figuring out Zoom. Here we go. Okay. Now we got it.
Well, I said if I were Black, they'd have killed me a long time. And if I were Black and saying the things I say, I wouldn't be alive.
Bullshit! No, you're not gonna say I'm sorry there's racism.
No, I do not have to ask you nicely.
I consider this exercise an injection of the live virus of racism.
This exercise, the next time you say race to me, sexist
I heard about that one, didn't I? With this woman.
I watched my students become what I told them they were. I watched little wonderful brown-eyed white people become vicious, ugly, nasty, discriminating, domineering people in the space of 15 minutes. I watched brilliant little blue-eyed white Christian children become timid and frightened and angry and unable to learn in the space of 15 minutes. If you do that with a whole group of people for a lifetime, you change them psychologically. You convince those who are analogous to the brown-eyed people that they are superior, that they are perfect, that they have the right to rule.
Did you learn anything this morning?
I think I learned from the experience of feeling like I was in a glass cage and I was powerless. I realized this morning that there were very few times in my life that I've ever been discriminated against, very few.
And you convince those who take the place of the blue-eyed students that they are less than.
How did they feel yesterday? Down like a dog on a leash.
If you do that for a lifetime, what do you suppose that does to them? You find out that there are people of color who refuse to live down to our expectations of them. I am now watching, at the national level, that exercise that I did based on eye color being reenacted in the government of the United States of America. I've done this with people of all ages for the last 50 years. Now think about that. Next year it will be the 50th anniversary of the killing of Martin Luther King Jr. and the beginning of the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. When are we going to learn? When are we going to put a stop to this?
White people's #1 freedom in the United States of America is the freedom to be totally ignorant about those who are other than white.
We live in the land of the free and the home of the brave. White people are the free, and people of color have to be brave. I want this situation to change. I want it to be such that no Black person has to have courage to get up in the morning, any more than I, as a white person, have to have courage to get up in the morning.
This is the most important book you or I or anybody else will ever read. I'm an educator. Every educator should refuse to perpetuate the myth of white superiority. There's only one race. It's the human race.
She's my favorite.
She's an inspiration.
She's still alive, isn't she?
Yeah, she was
Yeah.
on one of the late night talk shows recently.
Recently. It'd be interesting to see what she's saying right now, because that
Yeah.
clearly was in 2018.
That was like 2017, 2018. Yeah, so yeah, she's been doing a lot of interviews.
Corey Jo, what was the book she held up?
The Myth of Race.
Thank you.
I recommend, there's a video you can get that is that whole workshop where she's talking to college students. I've shown that, and I really recommend people watch that. It really walks you through the unlearning that she's was doing in her work.
Can I find it? Can I share it? Like, is it something I can find and share from YouTube?
I don't know. I'll look around and see. Mount Mary had a copy of it, so that's how I always used to use it.
Too, but yeah, you're right.
You should look for a link. It's watching the whole thing is really worth the time to see what it feels like to unlearn. What stages people go through. It's kind of like parallel to the stages of grief. You know, it's like there are stages of that unlearning process. They're very powerful.
Okay, yeah, we'll find it. Thank you guys again.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Corey.
With you.
Thank you,
Yes.
Corey.
Bye, all.
Good to see everyone.
See you on Tuesday, Fuelers. Thursday. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks again, Corey.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate you making this happen.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.